Hey everybody, welcome to the first episode of Republic Broadcasting. Here we're going to be talking about a couple things today, mainly focusing on Dooku Fallen Jedi. Here with me is Ben. I'm Keegan.
I'm Ben.
Alright, starting off the book, it basically starts with Dooku as a very young boy, and the book takes place in like two time zones. It starts off with him talking to Ventress and telling Ventress to look through some hollows and stuff and kind of see like how he goes through his life. And she's looking for Dooku's sister, whose name is Jensa, stumbles across like some holotapes and stuff in Dooku's drawer. And in his drawer, she like starts going through like all of his old diaries. And so that's when you get like the flashback to the young Dooku, and it starts off when he's a Padawan, and goes to this planet, Serenno, I believe is the name of it, or Serenno. Yeah, Serenno. So when he goes to Serenno, he's there with just kind of like his classmates and stuff, and he feels through the Force like a connection with somebody, and he's like kind of looking around, and Jensa's brother go and they get themselves into a bit of trouble, and Dooku comes and saves them. And after he saves them, then he's talking to him and stuff, and he comes to find out, like, when he meets the father says Dooku, like, because he gave him that name, and ended up, like, giving him away to the Jedi Order, and his father's very against the Order. He kind of thinks it's like a mutant, like a freak, and he wants literally nothing to do with him, and he could not wait for them to take him off the planet. He was like yelling at Yoda as to like, why did you bring him here? You said he would be gone forever or whatever. And which, I mean, I don't know, what a dick, like, but I don't know. So that's kind of like when he learns that like that's his father, which is how he learns of his lineage, and he ends up eventually becoming a count. But that's like where he learns of it. And he has such a strong connection with Jensa that he decides to start like writing her like holotapes and stuff, which is, I guess, against the council's guidance. Basically he's breaking the rules because Padawans aren't allowed to be sending holos, and he sends her a bunch of holotapes, and they correspond for a while, and then it like moves on later through his life, and there's a few time jumps here. When we get into it later, he ends up becoming his best friend, becomes Sifo-Dyas, which, you know.
Wow, okay, that's interesting.
So, like, he feels like he doesn't fit in at all with the Jedi Order, and he's very good. Obviously, he becomes, like, a master swordsman, and his technique is, like, one of the most flawless in Star Wars canon, supposedly. But he has, like, no friends, and the only person that he turns to is Sifo-Dyas. And the book's kind of funny because it gets to the point where Sifo-Dyas to me feels like a victim. Wow. Whereas, I mean, if you want to, you know about Sifo-Dyas, right?
Yeah, of course. So episode 2, it said that he was the one that ordered the clone army, right? Yep. I don't know if they recontextualized that at all in the book, or if it was more malicious on Sifo-Dyas' end, but from what you said, he's a victim, so.
Yeah, so what ends up happening is, going into the story a little more, Sifo-Dyas and Dooku are training, and eventually they have to do like their showcase to find a potential master, and all the masters kind of gather around as the ceremony is going on, and when it goes on, then they like judge and evaluate all these Padawans and see like, do any of them fit me? And both Sifo-Dyas and Dooku were aiming to become the apprentice of Lene Kastana.
Is that a new character, or did we see her in the movies?
I believe she's a new character. I can't remember from anything in any of the movies. And when I looked her up a little bit online, pretty much all the information about her is from the book. From the book. So she actually has a focus, which is kind of ties it in a little bit. Her area of study and research is on the Sith, and she believes that there's going to be a resurgence of Sith, so she wants to learn as much as she can about them to know how to counter them in the future when they do reemerge. But anyway, Dooku and Sifo-Dyas end up having to spar with each other in the training grounds, and Dooku pretty much disarms him like in like a second. I mean, it's so fast. But before he like does like his finishing blow, quote unquote, he throws the lightsaber back to Sifo-Dyas and says, "Come on, we gotta finish this together. Like, we're best friends and everything." So they end up finishing it, and at the end, Lean Kastana picks Sifo-Dyas, and Dooku's like, "Ah, crap! Like, I don't have a master now." And then, like, right at the last second, as we know, Yoda steps up and says, "I'll be his master." And then when he becomes Yoda's apprentice, and through the whole book, even, their relationship did not seem like a super strong one, which surprised me a little bit. It seemed like Yoda was such a hands-off teacher, and he's like always constantly meditating, and through the whole time, Dooku's like, "Dude, are we gonna do anything?" And I think kind of the problem with having Yoda as a master, and I never thought about it, is Yoda doesn't generally go on missions and stuff. He does occasionally, but like 90% of the time, they're sitting in a council room, and I think it was a bit, I don't know, underwhelming for Dooku to be Grandmaster Yoda's apprentice. They do end up going to this one world. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a bunch of floating platforms with propulsion so that they can get all of their crops on a separate plane. And then when they're on the separate plane, then all the people live on the world below. And when they come back to it, I guess Sifo-Dyas has started having a ton of premonitions and kind of his force visions, and they were getting really bad, and Lean Kastana is trying to curb them and like focus them for Sifo-Dyas, but that's actually like against what the Jedi Council wanted to do or would do. If they learn that an apprentice gets, or a Padawan starts getting force visions, they send them to like a camp, basically. And in this like camp or daycare or whatever it is, they focus it and almost try to repress it as much as they can. And once they're good enough at like not getting any more visions, then they send them back out into the world.
So I'd actually like to pause right there for a second. So that's really interesting for a couple reasons, because we see in Revenge of the Sith when Anakin's trying to talk to Yoda, be like, "I'm having visions of people I care about like being hurt," and Yoda's just like, "It's okay, just let it go." And yeah. that kind of reinforces that theme, and I think the theme of the prequels and the Clone Wars was that the Jedi were kind of stubborn and really were dogmatic, as Palpatine described them to be. And this is just hammering that home even more. That's really bad, and is a little scary, actually.
I feel like with Anakin Yoda one, I feel like Yoda almost just thought that they were bad nightmares, kind of, instead of like realizing that it's like force visions that are coming through and they're actual premonitions, which I think a big problem could have been that maybe he didn't bring it through with Obi-Wan enough, and Obi-Wan didn't recognize the force visions as not just like a general fear of like something.
Right, and that kind of lends to why maybe he feels so uncomfortable talking about it, because this is what they do to their Jedi students when something like this happens. Sure. They send them to off-world and force them to repress it. And
not only that, but like they're cut off from pretty much everyone they know. So Lean, his master, doesn't want that to happen, and she's like, it won't be good for him. It's just gonna try to shove him under a carpet and forget about him there. So she was going behind the council's back and didn't tell the council that he was having these visions. But one of his visions happens to be these giant plates in the sky around this world crashing down and like killing everybody. And they end up going there, and it's like just too late. As soon as they get there, everything like crashes down. And one of the kind of determining factors is that Dooku promised Lean that he wouldn't rat out her to the Jedi Council with Sifo-Dyas, and I think that was kind of a turning point a little bit of when he started kind of going off script a little more, so even just the communications with his sister throughout the book.
Does it say how old Dooku was when he became a Padawan?
It doesn't say explicitly, but I assume it was right around the age of 12 or 13 or something. It didn't seem like he was that old yet. I assume most of the Padawans get to their apprenticeship pretty early in their.
They got to be pretty
career.
early because Anakin, I believe, was 9 in episode 1, and they were saying he was too old. So must have been around 4 or 5, if not younger.
Well, I think they were talking about bringing Anakin into the temple at age 9 was too old, not necessarily when he became an apprentice. Dooku was taken into the temple as an infant, so we never knew his family like the rest of the Jedi, and I guess my answer was more about when he became apprentice to Yoda and not so much when he actually became a Padawan or youngling in the temple. But moving on, a little bit later in Dooku's story, he's just kind of doing his thing as apprenticing, being a Padawan to Master Yoda, and so Lean comes up to Dooku and asks him if he could accompany her to a different world, and I know it's a world that's really crazy strong with the dark side of the Force, and he ends up going to this world, again, behind the Council's back, and when he's there, him, Sifo-Dyas, and Lean Kastana all get, like, engrossed in this, like, fungus that, like, grows, like, exponentially fast, and they get, like, trapped in there, and it forces these dark side premonitions, and it forecasts pretty much, you know, all the episodes through, like, episode 6 for Dooku, up to episode 3 for Dooku, because I guess that's when he kind of shuts off. But it doesn't, like, he doesn't get a clear vision of, like, who's doing what, but he has the general sense of dark things.
Dark side taking over and bad things happening.
Yeah, so he's kind of getting exposed in a very early age, and this master is just really hammering it home that he should go to the dark side. Even though she's trying to prevent the resurgence of all the Sith and everything, she's exposing these very young Padawans that have, like, no training, no resistance to dark side forces, to these kinds of things. So, to me, it's just really bad mastering.
Yeah. In general, none of them seem all that great. we had Qui-Gon, and he was it. He was the only good one.
Yeah. I know that a little bit later going into it, then Dooku, they talk about his apprentices a little bit. So first was Rael, and then was Qui-Gon, obviously. And they kind of go into talking to them a little bit, but not a whole lot really happens with them. They just kind of touches on it in the book that he wasn't a master to them. And I think a big part of that was when Ventress was watching these holotapes, she saw how Dooku was as a master in the Jedi, which is obviously like 180 from how he is as a master as a Sith, you know. I thought that was kind of interesting to have Ventress's take, and she's like, this isn't Dooku. And one of the things that Ventress is dealing with in the book is she's having this voice inside her head, which is her old master, which I believe is Master Kai.
He was a Jedi, right?
Yeah, so he was a Jedi, and a little bit that you learn about Ventress kind of at this point in the book is that he was a Jedi, and he went to Dathomir, and that's where he found Ventress, kind of in misery and everything, and he took Ventress on as a Jedi apprentice on Dathomir, never brought her back to the Council.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So he never brought her back to the Council, and he was apprenticing her on Dathomir, and eventually, I believe it was Dooku came in, and he didn't kill her master, but her master died right before that from different circumstances.
Was Dooku a Sith at this point, or was?
Yes. Okay. So Dooku was a Sith at this point, and he took Ventress and basically said, "You're coming with me," and that's how she became an apprentice. He found her through that way, but it was really easy for him to take Ventress because she wasn't known to the Jedi Council that she was being apprenticed as a Jedi, that she was super strong in the Force, and she had a lot of rage for the people that killed her master, the people that killed her family. She was an orphan, so kind of all the stars aligned and everything. So that's kind of where you learn a little bit about Ventress about this point in the book. Then moving further into the book, you get kind of towards the climax of the book. You have Dooku goes back to Serenno because Serenno is having like an internal civil war, basically. The people are revolting. His father's died. His brother has now taken over as the Count, and he's kind of going crazy with it and oppressing the people like crazy. Everybody hates him, and because everybody's revolting, Dooku goes to the Council and says, "Hey, I need the Council's help to go to Serenno. We need to get the Republic involved. We need to calm everything down there because it's turning into a really bad place. And I guess the brother, a few years before that, had withdrawn from the Republic. He said, I'm not going to be part of this anymore. I don't want to be part of the Republic. And because of that, we're not like giving you any more money. We're not giving you any more resources or anything. So the Jedi Council decides that, hey, he's not part of the Republic. We're here to defend the Republic. And
wow,
that's not it. So we can't do anything and you can't either. Which obviously Dooku disobeys. He goes to the planet, and his brother is then trying to kill his sister and blame it on Dooku, the Jedi, to try to get his people to unify around hating the Republic and join the Separatists. So he ends up capturing like all of them, and I guess there's this legendary dark side monster that lives beneath the surface of the planet of Serenno, and he ends up bonding with this creature. Dooku does. Him and this creature bond, and he understands everything that's happened in this creature's life when they bond, and why it's a creature of the dark side, and how it was used as a weapon in the Old Republic, actually. It used to be a Sith-controlled planet. Serenno did, yeah. So he bonds with this old creature and learns of like the Sith through that way, learns of the dark side, learns of the power that this animal can hold, and he ends up controlling the animal to kill kill all the people that is holding his sister hostage. Kastana and Sifo-Dyas are there as well, and then kill his brother eventually. Distract his brother long enough that he kills him. So after bonding with this, then he like releases the beast from like his control of like killing all these things, and it just goes crazy. I mean, it's a dark side monster still, right? It was used as like a siege weapon back in the Old Republic. So he ends up having to then kill that monster, which he had bonded with. So it was like extremely hard for him because he had to kill like one of the things he valued most now at this time. And basically after that, then he decides that he's kind of fed up with the council. And he says, these were my people. Council did nothing for them. The Republic's done nothing for them. And everything's in ruins now because my brother's dead. There's no structure on this planet at all. So I need to take over, and I'm stepping away from the Jedi Council. I'm going to become Count Dooku. And here's kind of when you basically see that he casts the Jedi Council away completely and takes over. So because of that, then you don't like hear from him for a while. And it flashes back to Ventress, and she's tracking down Jenza, his sister. And when she ends up finding Jenza, then this is kind of where the two timelines converge. So she's found Jenza, and Jenza's almost babbling like a crazy person. And the voice inside Ventress's head, Kai, is basically her light side, like the good angel on your shoulder, telling her all the things that she should do. And the angel inside of her head, Kai, says, oh, she's kind of going crazy. And Ventress is like, I don't think she's going crazy at all. She's just been so warped by Dooku because she's just kind of mumbling about how the Jedi Order can save Dooku and how he's just made a few bad mistakes and he can turn back and stuff. So then Ventress ends up taking Jenza back to Dooku. And this whole story really kind of focuses on how Jenza's relationship with Dooku is like as close a sibling bond as like they could be, and how much they loved each other. And then when she finds Jenza, brings him back to Dooku, and then they talk for a couple seconds, and then after Jenza suggests that we go back to the council, then Dooku says, alright, Ventress, kill her. And Ventress ends up killing Jenza, and that's when Kai, the good angel inside of her head, goes away, and she reaches back to try to talk to him, and like nothing. So she's not getting any responses anymore, and she kind of knows that she's kind of crossed a line at that point.
Crossed that line.
And this is like her starting her apprenticeship, basically. She has to do this for Dooku, and he's force lightning her all the time, and it's just not really a productive relationship.
Yeah. You know, it's not to say that Dooku is totally justified, but it's really understandable because the Jedi were very lackadaisical when it came to helping people. They were very much a tool of the Republic rather than keepers of peace for the entire galaxy. It was more about, at a point, kind of felt like they existed to preserve the Republic's power rather than to actually help people, which is why I think people like Dooku had a problem, and why maybe Palpatine, so easily manipulated them. So Does Dooku join the dark side without any coaxing from Sidious?
No. I believe there is coaxing, but you don't get a good look at it in this novel. Mainly because the way the novel's structured is it's holotapes from diaries that Dooku wrote. And the reason you learn less and less the later years leading up to Dooku because he's writing less in his journal that he had when he was a kid. So you get very detailed experiences as a Padawan and even going into as a Jedi Knight and a bit as a Jedi Master. But then as he gets older, it gets fewer and far between the kind of tidbits of information. But he does mention to Ventress that there is someone else out there, referring to Sidious, that is put him on basically a righteous path.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we know that Sidious is a bad guy, but I kind of understand where he's coming from at this point. It didn't help the people that he cared about. It's very similar to the way that Anakin was manipulated. The council basically told him, we're not concerned about that. And it makes sense.
It basically is the same as... It's very similar to the Anakin story, except it's not his wife, it's his sister in this. And they have kind of that similar relationship. And when the council finds out about it, they say, hey, you got to break this off. We can't have that in the council at all. You got to break all your ties. And I think that's the main thing is once someone forms those ties... breaking that tie, I think, is a path to the dark side.
Right, because you're forcing somebody to, leave the people that they love with, no concern about how that affects the other person involved. Yeah, so it's not hard to see why they collapse at that point, and it brings more truth to Luke's point in Episode 8 that the Jedi at the height of their power, lost everything and got themselves annihilated, and not that they deserved that, but they made a lot of questionable decisions, and one could argue that they were manifesting the dark side in terms of their decisions, but not with the Force, but more with their actions
or inactions.
Inactions. Basically, they were too docile. So that's really interesting. Does it say anything about when does the book end? Is it at Episode 2? Is it way before still?
So the book, it's not super specific on when it ends. It just says that the way you can judge is Ventress has just become Dooku's apprentice, so I believe it's right after Episode 2, I would think, or very close to about the same time. I'm just thinking about in the Clone Wars series how old Ventress is and how long she's appeared to be an apprentice to Dooku. So
a lot of this could have easily taken place in the 10 years between 1 and 2. So we know he obviously left the Jedi Council before Episode 2.
Yeah, it doesn't have hardly anything from before or from after Episode 1. So it doesn't have a lot of information regarding that. And that's kind of his transition, I think, into the dark side and getting manipulated.
So do we get any insight into other characters? So Qui-Gon, we know about Ventress, Yoda. You mentioned Yoda was in the book.
Yeah, there's not a lot of Yoda, and that kind of surprised me, because one of the lines in the book is, it's a sacred bond between master and apprentice, and to me, their relationship seems very separated, It seems that they don't have the bond that, every other master and apprentice seems to have throughout the series. Yoda's still more of a grand master role, and Lene Kistana's doing a lot of, what you would expect the normal master to do in training him and stuff. So you don't get a lot except for the fact that you learn that Yoda was kind of a hands-off teacher and maybe didn't pay attention to his students how he should have. Didn't keep a close eye on what they were doing. I mean, Dooku would go off for weeks on a time with Lene Kistana or Sifo-Dyas, and then he would come back and it's nothing was ever said about it. Did Yoda not care? Did he not know?
Yeah, that says a lot about how Yoda was in the prequels. It seems like the Jedi Masters in the Council, especially throughout the prequels, very wise in a lot of ways, very powerful, very strong in the Force, but it's kind of like those managers in real life who get promoted because they're really good at their current job, but just because you can teach somebody something doesn't mean you know how to raise someone. And I think the problem with the Jedi taking these kids at such a young age is not only do they have to teach them, they had to raise them into fully functional adults as well. And it kind of seems like they didn't do a very good job at that part of it.
Yeah.
So we don't. The book doesn't end in his death in episode 3 or anything like that.
No,
so
it really ends definitely before episode 3.
So it definitely informs a lot about those movies. Now that I know all of this, I'm gonna go back and rewatch them, and I'm sure it'll retroactively make it even better. In the same way that I felt like the Clone Wars did for all those characters.
Yeah, I think the other character that it focuses a lot on in the book is Sifo-Dyas. And the reason I think that he's such a victim is the way he was treated after he started getting visions probably wasn't how he should have been treated. I'm not saying he should have been shipped off to a camp, but I'm saying that I don't think Lene Castano knew how to handle it and was just kind of muddling her way through. One of the things about Sifo-Dyas' vision is anything he saw in his vision, he felt however the people in that vision felt, which was driving him absolutely insane. I mean, and almost every premonition he had was of people dying. So, like, he just had a rough childhood, and I think he got the visions of the droid army coming in and as the separatists killing people left and right, and he was feeling how all those people felt. Like, he felt that these people needed to be protected, and the Republic was the only people that could do that. And that's when he decided he was going to do the clone army, and he actually sat on the Jedi Council for a while, which they touch on in the book. And he ends up leaving the council, but after he tried to convince the council for this clone army and they said no, that's when he went behind their backs and did it anyway. But
because they basically, now they have a history of ignoring problems.
Exactly, and they didn't want to focus on the visions because, they say visions aren't set in stone, it's a possible outcome, but we can't prepare for all possible outcomes, which has some truth in it, but at the same time, if that's one of the possible outcomes, you would think you would try to avoid that outcome.
You would think you'd at least try to prepare. Maybe not ordering, 6 million clones for an army, but doing something, maybe bringing it to the attention of the Republic. I mean, they know what Jedi are, they know their powers, or they at least have an idea of what they are. You would think that you would try to be like, hey, we're getting these really bad visions of something bad coming, maybe we should prepare for it. Maybe they didn't want to seem like warmongers, but then they kind of did that anyway because they led the army, so...
I don't understand how still the Jedi got roped into being the generals of this clone army. It still, to me, it seems like it should have been probably a Republic matter and separate from the Jedi Order.
If anything, I feel like the Jedi should have operated in the way that maybe medics currently do, where they'll heal... their own people, then you have like neutral parties that will help tend to both sides. That's maybe how they should have operated, just protecting people, not leading armies.
Yeah. I think one of their biggest issues was taking sides in a war that was, understandably, they were part of the Republic, so they were defending the Republic, but at the same time, maybe they should have just been, I agree, helping the people of all these planets instead of either party.
It felt like the Jedi became very institutionalized, and in that way, they also went out of their way to protect the institution of the Republic rather than its values. And I think that probably helped to lead them on that dark path. And that's really interesting. That sounds awesome, and I might actually go ahead and read that myself now.
Yeah, it's not a very long book. I mean, I think I listened to it on an audio tape, and it was only like 6.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
It's really short, actually.
So, any interesting miscellaneous facts from the book?
I think one of the biggest ones is that Serenno was like almost a capital of Sith enterprises back in the Old Republic, and they used these beasts. And one of the things that it touched on in that is that Dooku, as a child, found a portrait of this giant creature, and Jenza was like, "Whoa, don't touch that. It's dark side. Not dark side," she said. "It's bad luck." And of course, what does he do? He touches it. So. Just forecasting his entire turn, but in that moment he feels very powerful when he touches the painting, and I believe the building crashes down around him and he doesn't even notice because he's like so focused on it, but he ends up getting pulled away, but that feeling never quite left him. And I think, as a Padawan, he was probably like 10 years old at the time.
That actually leads even further into maybe why it's so easy for certain Jedi in particular to be swayed to the dark side. Is it's not just that they decided they want to be bad now. A lot of it is the Jedi pushes them away and doesn't solve problems. Too docile, too meek, doesn't really try to protect people, is very beholden to the Republic. And the dark side makes you feel powerful and euphoric, and it makes you feel like you can protect anyone and do whatever you want. And if it operates that way, and where it's like a high and maybe even like a drug sort of way, then it makes sense as to why you can go from 1 minute never thinking you would hurt somebody to doing anything to achieve your goals at that point. So that's really fascinating.
I think in another episode we could talk about, I just read Dark Disciple, and that highlights very well how stupid the Jedi Council can be, and how in their attempts to steer people away from the dark side, they literally drive them directly headfirst into it. So I think that'll be an interesting topic to pick up on a later episode.
Absolutely. So I think that's it for this discussion.
Yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up. So, let us know what you guys think. Do you think Sifo-Dyas was a victim? Do you think his father was a dickhead? Let us know in the comments down below. Have a good one. Republic signing off.